I am the stone that the builder refused. I am the visual, the inspiration that make ladies sing the blues. I'm the spark that makes your idea bright, the same spark that lights the dark so that you can know your left from your right. I am the ballad in your box, the bullet in the gun, the inner glow that let you know to call your brother son. The story that just begun, the promise of what's to come, and I will remain a soldier till the war is won. Chop, 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 chop.
Hey guys, welcome to my video. I am your host, the J-Man, and I'm chronologically confused. In this video I'm going to be talking about comic book titles and how the publishers or writers really screw up the titles and the issue numbers and the volume numbers. It all becomes a big clusterfuck. And I really have an issue with this. I mean, it kind of gets on my nerves. Sure, I can figure it out if I really study it, but it takes so much time, and just for quick reference, it's mind-boggling to try and figure out where you should start reading, what book you should buy before which other book, which book you should exclude from your purchase list. It becomes a big headache, and if they would just simply follow a logic of numbering these books or these issues, then we the readers wouldn't have such a confusion or a hard time. This is really basic and simple, and I'm going to break this down for you. For anyone who's out there writing, editors, publishers, whoever you are, titling your books, numbering your books, you've got to do it the right way. Otherwise you're going to give readers so much frustration and headache. It's going to be a total pain in the ass, and they're going to just turn away from your product. Plus, not to mention that you make yourself to look like a fool if you don't know how to count. 1, 2, 3. I mean, come on, how hard is that? So, I'm going to start out with a simple, basic explanation. Alright? I'm going to be using The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as an example of how books in a series should be numbered or categorized or classified. But these books have to be numbered this way in order for people to be able to quick reference them, specify what they want, specify what they've read exactly. You know, when they're trying to reference something, they don't want to have to pretty much print out a bibliography and say, okay, it was published, then this is the exact book I'm talking about. This book that was published in 1989 by such and such company. No, they don't want to do that. They want to simply state the title and maybe the volume number, and that's it. Okay? But it becomes extremely difficult to clarify just what the hell or which book you're talking about if the numbers are all confused, okay? You know, I'll give you an example. Let's say someone says, I would like to read such and such book, such and such title, but I don't know where to start. And they ask the question to somebody, and the person's like, well, why don't you start with one that has a long history so you have plenty to read? So, okay, which volume has the longest history? You go and you look at the title, you look at the volume list, and you see it's all confused. It's all a mess because it goes from volume 2 to volume 4 and then back to volume 5 again, and then the numbering jumps, and you're just totally confused. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about in just a few minutes. But first of all, I'm going to start off with the example of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay? So, the way this works is that you have to imagine a writer comes up with the title of a book. He comes up with an idea first, and he says, okay, the story's going to be about this and this and this. What should I call it? What should I title my book? Alright, so he comes up with the title, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay? He writes the story and goes, you know what? As he's writing it, he starts to think and says, you know what? I can really expand this and make it more than one story. My whole story isn't just going to fit into one book, so I could probably make more money if I sold several books and extend the story. So, I'm going to go ahead and write The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Bam! Produced it. It printed. It was produced. It's on the shelves. Okay, but by that time, book number 2 is being written. Also called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But you give it a subtext, a subtitle, to distinguish it from the original. You say, Because if you just called it The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, obviously people would be confused. Maybe you could put a number 2 by it. Okay, that would work. But at this point, you don't know how many there's going to be. So simply numbering them might not be the way you want to do things. Okay, so you make a subtitle, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, subtitle, whatever. Alright, and then that becomes basically volume 2. Alright, which means that Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, no subtitle, becomes volume 1. Alright, now if you do more books, he does like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, whatever the third book was, I guess the Dawn Treader, I don't know, but he calls it that, and then that's going to become number 3, okay, volume 3. So you have volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. When it's all said and done, let's say there's 7 books. I'm not exactly sure how many books are in that series, but let's say 7. That becomes volume 1 through 7. They pretty much all have subtitles. It's very clear in what order you're supposed to read the books. Even though each book itself is episodic, it still continues somewhat from the previous. Not to say that you can't just pick one book out in the series and read that one and understand it, because you probably could. But if you want to read them all, you might as well start from the beginning. You might as well get the whole story. Okay, so it's clear. Volume 1 through Volume 7. You know where to start, you know where to end. Bam. Okay. But what if? What if years later someone decides they want to write another book and call it The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it's the same? Obviously you can't do that unless you own the copyright or the license, but if it's the same universe, the same fiction, then you have to ask yourself, is this story either A, prequel to the originals, B, an addition or alternate to the originals, or C, a sequel to the originals? Okay, so you have to clearly come up with that idea in your head. Which one is this before you can title the book? Because if you try to title the book before you come up with that, it's going to be a disaster. Okay, so for titling books in sequential order, you obviously can use 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't make any sense to say 2.5. You can't do that. It doesn't make any sense to include decimals. It's just pointless. The same goes with fractions. The same goes with negatives. There's no point in doing that. It's just confusing. Alright, now that should be obvious, but anyway. So let's say you decide to write a sequel and you call it The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Subtext or subtitle, whatever. That becomes, maybe if the last one was volume 7 and this is a sequel, that becomes volume 8. But if you don't want to do it that way, maybe you say, okay, well, the first series of books, the first 7 books, I'm thinking of that as a volume. I'm thinking of that as volume 1. So I'm going to call mine volume 2. And then people see that and they go, well, what do you mean volume 2? Volume 2 was Prince Caspian. How can volume 2 be yours? And that creates a confusion. So you cannot think of it that way. You have to go by the original titling, the original volume numbers, because you can't rewrite the previous numbers what already came out. Those have to stay the same. You can only adjust your numbers or your titling to match that titling. So instead of calling yours volume 2, you would have to call yours maybe possibly addition to, or another name for that, but not, you can't use the same title as volume, because that becomes confusing. But yet people do it. Okay, so if it's a prequel, you have to include the word origin or prequel somewhere in the title so that people understand this. If it's an addition or an alternate, you pretty much have to call it an addition, or not edition with the letter E, but a addition, or alternate. You pretty much have to use that somewhere in the title. Okay, you got to make it clear. Especially if you're going to use the same title, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, with no subtitle, then it's become really confusing. So you pretty much have to include the word alternate or additional into the title. I know a lot of artists or writers don't like to do that, but it's extremely important. Okay, now that I've said all that, let's take a look at a horrible, faulty way of numbering things.